Hey folks! So today's episode actually came from a buddy, given that the indie gamer chick shot me a review key. Essentially, she wanted to see what my thoughts would be on DYA Games brick busting adventure, Strikey Sisters. So what I'm trying to say is it's time to ask the burning question. Was Strikey Sisters a breakout hit, or did it strike out in record time? I'm your host Arlyeon. Let's find out together. It was just another day in the lives of the Strikey Sisters, that is, until they discovered that their beloved pet Sachiro had gone missing. Fearing that it had been kidnapped, the pair begin to explore the countryside, hoping to find any clue they can about where Sachiro is gone. A quest that tends to go horribly wrong, given that Aline's a bookwormy bully magnet, and Mary's muscle-brained manners have her picking fights in record time. Execution-wise, this is played out in a number of bite-sized voice-acted cutscenes, one during the intro, and then a new one each time you encounter one of the game's myriad bosses, plus an additional one after a certain point and at the ending. So, bit by bit, the mystery surrounding the missing Sachiro is unveiled, oftentimes despite the sisters' efforts, given they suffer from a crippling inability to do anything but wake up and choose violence. Suffice to say, it's a pretty lighthearted story, which plays out more like a sequence of skits than anything else, but it's not bad. Also, having the ability to rewatch the cutscenes from the menu was a nice touch, since they only play the first time you visit a boss. A fact I was grateful for, given the sheer amount of times I was destroyed during this game. Seriously, it took me a while to grapple with the fact that as far as brick breakers go, this one was a doozy. Like, yes, the basics are simple. You have a ball, a magical girl that serves as a paddle, and an arrangement of bricks you need to smash up. And yes, you can even tailor the ball's speed with the difficulty level options. What's less simple is the diverse range of monsters which populate each region of the game, the likes of which have distinct lethal attacks and endless numbers. Yeah, it's a war of attrition until you manage to bust the last block in a stage, which can get pretty tricky at times when you're weaving past a dive-bombing spider or trying to sneak a shot past a baddie building a barricade of boulders. Like, yes, they do stop spawning once that last block's been broken, but until then there's literally nothing preventing one from randomly spawning in the way of a beautifully aimed shot and giving you defeat from the jaws of victory. Especially if you made the mistake of charging up your shot, because, yeah, given the paddle's a magical girl, you can attack, swing your staff at the ball to help direct it, bot baddies, and even enemy shots to cancel them out and reflect them back at the sender. That said, you have a particularly nefarious double-edged sword in the form of the charge strike. Hold down attack for a second and you can send the ball rocketing to do huge brick damage and even reflect attacks, all with more range and power than a normal hit. But, I'm not kidding when I say send a ball rocketing. Send that sucker at the wrong angle, and there's almost no way in hell you're catching up to it, especially if you're unlucky enough for it to reflect off a freshly spawned enemy. Which hurts, since you only have a meager 3 health points. And yes, there is a grace period after you take damage that does provide you a few fleeting invulnerability frames, but it's very short, which means there's almost nothing in the way of you getting hit by an enemy or its attack, stunning you just long enough that the ball bounces off the screen and combos into a second chunk of health loss. Fan-friggin-tastic. And while you do have a co-op mode, this can actually get you killed even faster, since while enemy attacks only affect one player, a missed ball damages both, so it's entirely possible to bottom out your health in record time. And given there isn't any form of character advancement, your progress in Strikey Sisters is going to hinge on you mastering the mechanics. Thankfully, there are power-ups that spawn when you mash monsters, and given they range from ball upgrades to healing, and even just calling down lightning or throwing bombs, these can do a lot to change the tide of battle. Especially when you get to the game's boss fights. Unlike the other stages, breaking the blocks is optional, as your only goal is to empty out the boss's health bar. To that end, the power-ups are a godsend, though it can be just as viable to avoid property damage and simply wedge a ball between a wall and the boss. That or reflect their various attacks right back into their face, you've got a surprising number of viable options at your disposal. That is, unless you're interested in the game's optional challenge goals. I stress optional here because goddamn do I hate these. See, every stage has a certain set of goals to achieve. The first one is getting the monster capture card, a special attack that shoots a beam that clears out one monster and also adds it to your bestiary. While this sounds simple, it requires you to collect 50% of the gold coins in a stage, which can be hard when monsters and their attacks are getting in the way or special abilities are blowing up portions of the landscape. Oh, and if you miss snagging up the power-up when it spawns from a chest, try again. Did you accidentally stumble into another power-up while you were aiming a shot at an enemy you haven't added? Try again. Honestly, the biggest saving grace is that successfully hitting an enemy immediately adds them to the bestiary, so even if you die, you don't need to do it again. Unlike the next two challenge goals. Green gems require 60% of a stage coins, which then spawn a chest containing a green gem to collect. That only counts if you clear the stage. And the last optional goal is only in certain stages, and it requires you to collect 69% of coins or more so that a special key chest appears. Provided you collect it and clear the stage, this in turn unlocks an optional level, or in the case of a certain northwest segment, an entire challenging area and boss, and is probably the only secret level I have no regrets about unlocking. While all of these are certainly an option for tryhards, I'll admit that my enjoyment of Strikey Sisters dramatically improved once I stopped chasing after the bonuses, as I found myself hindered from using the full range of the character's power-ups to progress, turning the stages into utter slogs as I tried to make sure I collected the bare minimum of coins needed. That said, while those challenges certainly made my soul die one chunk at a time, its visuals did help to breathe a bit more life back into it. It's a legitimately nice looking bit of sprite work, and I was genuinely surprised at how many unique enemies there were to encounter. The detail put into animating their attacks and abilities was neat too, and really helped because they telegraphed their attacks, and thus my impending death. And I didn't expect the OST to be half as good as it was. There's some genuinely solid brick-busting bops in there, and a decent amount of variety that once I started to gain momentum, I got to hear a number of distinct themes. Though, the voice acting is a bit more of a mixed bag for me. Maybe it's just that I'm a heartless monster, but the fake crying had me occasionally rooting for the bosses in the cutscenes.
No, you're lying. That's not true.
And it just took me a while to figure out that the voice acting was actually tied to the game's sound effects. There's actually no separate toggle for sound effects and voice work. They're just linked. Suffer, I guess. But yeah, that gets the long form out of the way, so let's just rattle through the conclusion for you folks. What I'm ultimately trying to say is, I have very mixed feelings about Strikey Sisters. My original experience with a good chunk of the game was tinged with frustration, simply because I found myself going out of my way to get the gems and collecting coins in case they were needed for some sort of unexplained mechanic. And it was only when I stopped pursuing these and began to play the stages organically that I really started to enjoy myself. There is, after all, some great variety in the enemies you can encounter, as well as the bosses, all of whom have distinct mechanics you need to learn. It's a legitimately solid game on that front, and it became even more so once I asked my editor Hop to join in for the last stretch of my adventure, because it just became this horrible comedy of errors which had us cracking up as we made each other fail miserably. Sure, it didn't do much to change the fact that insofar as the story was concerned, I still occasionally was just feeling really bad for the bad guys because one of the protagonists is a bit of a hot-headed bully, or the fact that I couldn't map any of my controls to my mouse. But I definitely warmed up to the experience in the long run. That said, it wasn't quite enough that I could say I'd recommend this to just anyone. Strikey Sisters in the end feels like a bit of a fumble to me, as there's a lot of good ideas, but the end result still left me with an undercurrent of frustration that dogged me throughout my playthrough even after I stopped chasing optional content. I think it says something that while I felt a certain degree of satisfaction at clearing out the game's bosses, I felt an even greater sense of dread when I realized I'd unlocked a slew of bonus stages to clear through. That said, if you are a Brick Buster enthusiast looking to get your balls broken, there's definitely a lot of content to crunch through. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. For the Discord savvy folks, click the video description to find a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, and to my Patreon so you can support me and the other members of Crit Hit, read Hop. Lastly, if you want to see me get dunked on in indie games live, you can check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Arlyeon. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.